Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
Have you ever noticed how much Jesus asks questions in the scriptures? So many times. Often when a question is asked of him, he sends a question right back, like, what do you want? What do you think? Questions engage us. They make us think. In Jesus' situation, I think he wanted us to take ownership of our faith, not just to tick off boxes or get easy answers, but to really dig deep with God. Faith is ongoing and evolving, and it often involves questions. It's how we stay active in our faith, always seeking, always growing. But in the case of the Pharisees, Sadducees, and teachers of the law, questions weren't a way to learn, but rather to ensnare. They thought they could pull one over on Jesus, and again, they never could, as we've talked about this week. By the way, I'm Jen. This is the Bible for Busy People. This week we've been talking about the Pharisees' encounters with Jesus. Today we're reading in Matthew 22, where there is just a line of questioning for Jesus. But don't worry, he is always able to rise up to the task of answering. We're reading in Matthew 22, starting in verse 15. It says, "Then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words." It's all right there, just laid out. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. "Teacher," they said, "we know that you are a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not?" But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, "You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax." They brought him a denarius, and he said to them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they replied. Then he said to them, "So give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, so they left him and went away. First of all, this flattery here is pretty intense. I mean, had the Pharisees ever had a good encounter with Jesus? I'm wondering why they turned on the charm now. It does say they sent other people, but still, they went in armed. It was a distraction and a deception, and Jesus saw right past it. John 2, verses 24 to 25 says, "But Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people. He did not need any testimony about mankind, for he knew what was in each person." You're not fooling anyone, Pharisees. So here's the real question instead of should we pay taxes to Caesar? That's not really what they were asking. Really, what they were trying to get to is, Jesus, will you submit to the laws of the land? Or are you some kind of radical insurrectionist? But Jesus avoided their trap. Money is not the point. It's earthly. What belongs to God is our hearts, our actions, our faith, and all that we have. The money is not important. Next up, we're reading in verse 23, which says, "That same day, the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him with a question. 'Teacher,' they said, 'Moses told us that if a man dies without having children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for him. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first one married and died, and since he had no children, he left his wife to his brother. Same thing happened to the second and third brother, right on down to the 7th. Finally, the woman died. Now then, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be of the 7, since all of them were married to her?' Jesus replied, 'You are in error, because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God. At the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven. But about the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what God said to you? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living.' When the crowds heard this, they were astonished at his teaching." So next up came the Sadducees. This was a different group of people. The Pharisees were leaders by example in the eyes of the masses, and they believed in both the written and oral tradition of the law as well as the resurrection. The Sadducees were a different religious party. They were the ones who were more elite. They held more of the traditional roles in society. They were wealthy, and they interacted the most with Rome. And they did not believe in the oral tradition or, importantly, the resurrection. So they approached Jesus with a question on the resurrection, another trick. Once again, Jesus reminded them that God's kingdom is not of this world. It doesn't use the same currency, and it also doesn't follow the rules that we have here. Jesus told them that there is existence that goes beyond the life and death of this world, a spiritual existence. Jesus challenged them to go beyond earthly thinking into a kingdom mindset. In verse 34, we go back to the Pharisees. It says, "Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question. 'Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?' Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." Many of us have heard Jesus' answer so many times it can lose meaning for us. But think about who he's talking to, these people who have been absolutely meticulous about getting the law perfectly right. I'm not sure what kind of answer they were looking for, but this is the right one. To love God and love others is the core of our whole faith, our whole way of being. And Jesus, as we know, was all about the heart, not just appearances. Finally, we're down in verse 41, which says, "While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them, 'What do you think about the Messiah? Whose son is he?' 'The son of David,' they replied. He said to them, 'How is it then that David, speaking by the Spirit, calls him Lord? For he says, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. If David calls him Lord, how can he be his son?' No one could say a word in reply, and from that day on, no one dared to ask him any more questions." So finally, Jesus is the one asking the questions, and he challenged their viewpoint that the Messiah was a king that was still to come and that he would be a regular human being. They weren't expecting God to come in a human form. Jesus continually drew them out and called them to think bigger, beyond what they had been taught or taught themselves, to really go back into the scriptures and see what was said about him. Questions help us grow and consider things differently. What questions are you asking God today? How might you look at them through a bigger, broader perspective? I'll leave you with that, and we'll talk one more time tomorrow about the Pharisees' encounters with Jesus. If you are listening to this podcast, I'm going to assume two things about you. First of all, that you're a busy person. And second, that you are in need of a restful break. Cannon Beach Conference Center is the place for a beautiful coastal retreat. Whether it's one of their enriching conferences or your own church or ministry event. You can find out more at 800-745-1546 or visit cbcc.net. Thank you to Cannon Beach Conference Center for sponsoring the Bible for Busy People.
Thank you for listening to The Bible for Busy People. If you need prayer or want to go deeper in your faith, visit our show notes. Will you take a moment to share with a friend and leave a review? It helps the Bible get into even more people's minds and hearts. Find more podcasts that will recharge you at purposely.com.